We begin with Donald Trump's number 2, under the glare of the Klieg lights, finally. Ohio Senator, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance will deliver a primetime address on this, the third day of the Republican National Convention. Of that, the New York Times writes this, quote, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio had never attended a national political convention before this year. On Wednesday, 2 days after Donald Trump added him to the Republican presidential ticket, he will speak from one of his party's loftiest heights. The J.D. Vance, who will appear today, is not going to be the one who once said that Trump was either a, quote, cynical a-hole or, curtain number 2, America's Hitler. It will not be the J.D. Vance who described Donald Trump as, quote, cultural heroin, or, quote, a moral disaster, or, quote, a total fraud. We could go on, but we only have 2 hours. Instead, the J.D. Vance, who the country will see tonight, is the one who's been saying things like this.
Democrats see an opportunity to massively transform who votes in American elections and who gets congressional representation. They are using it to subvert American democracy by changing out the people who currently live in this country with other people. It's a disgraceful attack on American sovereignty. If you wanted to kill a bunch of MAGA voters in the middle of the heartland, how better than to target them and their kids with this deadly fentanyl? It's like Joe Biden wants to punish the people who didn't vote for him, and opening up the floodgates to the border is one way to do it.
But I also think, there's something comparable, between abortion and slavery.
This is one of the great tricks that I think the sexual revolution pulled on the American populace, which is this idea that, like, well, okay, these marriages were fundamentally, they were maybe even violent, but certainly they were unhappy, and so getting rid of them and making it easier for people to shift spouses like they change their underwear, that's going to make people happier in the long term.
What kind of virtues do we want our leaders to promote? Certainly not the people who are burning Kenosha, Wisconsin down. We want to promote the types of virtues that exist in Kyle Rittenhouse.
Takes your breath away, huh? Now, the extremism, if you can even call it that, it's almost an insult to the extremists, but the extremism that J.D. Vance has peddled publicly over the years is what earned him a spot as Trump's number 2. Now, that spot's only open because Trump literally left the last guy for dead. But the point of that extremism has not been wasted or lost on the Biden-Harris campaign. Vice President Kamala Harris is out with a new video laying out the stakes ahead of Vance's speech tonight.
Hey, everyone. So Donald Trump has picked his new running mate, J.D. Vance. Trump looked for someone he knew would be a rubber stamp for his extreme agenda, and make no mistake, J.D. Vance will be loyal only to Trump, not to our country. And unlike Mike Pence, Vance said he would have carried out Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election. He supports a national abortion ban and voted against protecting IVF. And if elected, he will help implement the Extreme Project 2025 plan for a second Trump term, which would target critical programs like Head Start and Medicare. But we are not going to let that happen.
That's where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Staff writer for The Atlantic, McKay Coppins, joins us. Also joining us here at the table, David Jolly, and writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, is here. David Jolly, of course, former Republican congressman, now an MSNBC political analyst. I mean, we really could have gone on for 2 hours, and McKay has the best quote I've ever read about J.D. Vance from Mitt Romney that we'll get to in a second. But I mean, the contrasts write themselves.
Sure. As I said, I think the other day, flip-flopping, I think, is kind of baked in. And I don't look at J.D. Vance through the same lens as I look at Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and others. I see the nomination of J.D. Vance as kind of the final transformation of today's Republican Party. The resistance has died. It's no longer there. And J.D. Vance is happy to take the torch and hoping himself he could take the torch even further 4 years from now. I think there's a purity to the Vance nomination. Now, that doesn't ignore his transformation from what used to be his political convictions to now, but I think he has fully lined up with the Trumpism movement, and it really is a coda to the last 8 years. And as we were discussing, I think part of that is also look at the other atmospherics of this convention, the absence of Paul Ryan, of Mitt Romney, of Mike Pence himself. Donald Trump this time around didn't need a Mike Pence. He didn't need a Marco Rubio. He didn't need a Lindsey Graham. He was able to reach all the way down to a J.D. Vance, the Puritan now of Trumpism. Look at the fact that Mitch McConnell got booed on the floor and that Kevin McCarthy really isn't welcome there. Matt Gaetz was kind of right about that. This party transformation is done, and I think that's one of the significant themes that we're seeing in Milwaukee.
No one has been able to answer this question for me, Amanda Carpenter, but I've been reading, this kind of summer I've been reading Project 2025, and the loyalty test is super specific. I mean, in 2016, it was sort of amorphous, much like Trump, he would say, referring to himself in third person, and Don McGahn wanted some NDAs signed, but that was about it. I mean, this time it's on paper, and the things that J.D. Vance has said about Donald Trump go much further than 8 years on this program of some of the most sort of alarmed from a constitutional, legal, and political spectrum. I mean, J.D. Vance has called him worse things than anyone I've ever seen, and he's called him America's Hitler. The plan he is associated with, Project 2025, would prevent him from going near a Trump administration in any slot other than vice president.
Yeah, you know, I spent last night watching Nikki Haley's speech and Ron DeSantis and thinking about the theme of unity and what the party is really rallying behind, especially when it becomes clear with this pick of J.D. Vance. And what the party is rallying behind and why is a Trump-Vance ticket and not Trump-Pence is that the party has come to terms with an authoritarian view where it is acceptable to use every tool at an executive's disposal to stay in power. That's what Project 2025 is really about, consolidating executive power to wield it, full control of the federal government. And when I talk to people about the autocratic threat, as we've been doing at Protect Democracy for years now, the thing that is hardest for people to believe is the idea if Trump was elected to a second term, he wouldn't leave. The selection of J.D. Vance proves that this is a real threat that could happen if Trump is elected. And that is because J.D. Vance is willing to do everything that Mike Pence wouldn't. He went along with the election lies. He thought the false elector strategy was a good idea. He doesn't have a problem with Trump leaning on the Department of Justice to create these sham investigations against his perceived opponents. He's whitewashed the January 6th insurrection. And he says today that the real threat to democracy is any form of accountability for those actions. The real threat to autocracy is accountability. And that is what the Trump-Vance ticket resists, and that is what the party is promoting.
McKay, for your great book about Mitt Romney, I think it's in the book and the article that you wrote around the time the book was published. Just take us inside Romney's instant classic about J.D. Vance.
You know, I remember talking to Mitt about J.D. Vance when Vance was running in the Republican Senate primary in Ohio. And I think what really got under Romney's skin was kind of the speed and abject cynicism of J.D. Vance's MAGA makeover, right? Like, Romney had actually met J.D. Vance before, thought of him as kind of this bright kid who had some interesting conservative ideas about how to address poverty. He had read his book, thought it was really insightful. And mostly he thought that J.D. Vance was very clear-eyed about what Trump was offering to the white working class and why it was actually really poisonous to the culture of the Trump base. And then to see J.D. Vance so quickly decide, I want a Senate seat and I'm going to abandon everything I've said before and kind of remake myself in the Trump Republican image was a little too much for Mitt to take. I still remember sitting in his living room and Mitt just saying, you know, I think it would be hard for me to disrespect somebody more than J.D. Vance. And he just went on and on and on about it. You know, it's all in the book. It's kind of become widely cited in recent days. But you know, the important point, and I think Mitt was wrong about one thing, was that he said to me, you know, I want to take J.D. Vance aside and say, you know, a Senate seat isn't worth all this. Like, you're not going to be famous and powerful just being one of 100 senators. Well, J.D. Vance actually got a prize much bigger than a Senate seat. He could very well be the next vice president. And, might be the favorite to be the Republican nominee in 2028. So if he was selling out, he didn't sell himself too cheaply, I guess.
So I'm going to read the excerpt. It's you're underselling it. It's perfect. Quote, I don't know that I can disrespect someone more than J.D. Vance, Romney told me. Vance had seemed bright and thoughtful with interesting ideas about how Republicans could court the white working class without indulging in toxic Trumpism. Then, in 2021, Vance decided he wanted to run for Senate and reinvented his entire persona overnight. Quote, I do wonder, how do you make that decision? Romney mused to me as Vance was degrading himself on the campaign trail that summer. How can you go over a line so stark as that? And for what? Romney wished he could grab Vance by the shoulders and scream, this is not worth it. It's not like you're going to be famous and powerful because you became a U.S. senator. It's like, really, you sell yourself so cheap. The prospect of having Vance in the caucus made Romney uncomfortable. How do you sit next to him at lunch? If Donald Trump's glorification of the criminal acts his supporters carried out on January 6th and his description of the insurrectionists as patriots were not enough for you, today there's more. Because today, after completing his four-month sentence for defying a congressional subpoena, a crime, former Trump trade advisor Peter Navarro is going straight from federal prison to the Republican National Convention, where there's still more. He's slated to speak tonight from the stage. Navarro will also be interviewed by Donald Trump Jr. in the next hour. He was found guilty in September of 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a subpoena from the January 6th Select Committee. Navarro was someone intimately involved in Donald Trump's effort to overturn the 2020 election, concocting what was known as the Green Bay Sweep plan to ultimately stop the certification of President Joe Biden's victory. We're back with Nick and Claire. Nick, the Green Bay Sweep sounds like it would be facilitated by some of the changes that you and Jim report on.
Yeah, exactly. It's when you look at what they're trying to do this year in terms of making certification an open question, trying to change that idea that it's not a ministerial stamp, it's that local election officials actually have the discretion to throw out the popular vote of a municipality or a state if they feel like there was improprieties. That was the basis for the entire idea of submitting false or alternate electors to Congress to have them certified to throw the election to Trump in 2020. It's really the root of the playbook. It's just what's happening this time is they're trying to get all of this established before the election. You know, what made 2020 such a chaotic and haphazard effort is that it kind of stumbled all out of and after Election Day. Those lawsuits, 63, I think, lawsuits were filed in about a 3-week period. The former president lost all of them. And then they started to think, okay, well, what about certification? And what if we can then get these electors into Congress or a different slate and then they could certify it? Now, as Jim and I reported, that entire thought, albeit not electors, but certification, is being argued before courts at this very moment.
Claire, what's amazing is the legwork going into cheating.
Yeah. And we all know that this is a guy who would never admit he lost. So there's only one answer.
Golf or president.
Anything. He's the best. I'm the best. Have I told you I'm the best? I'm the most wonderful. And so this is just another example. If he loses, then he has to have been cheated. And we saw it, and he started saying it a lot beginning in April, the last time he ran, remember? Over and over again. Well, I'll accept it, but, they'll probably cheat or it'll be a fraud if I lose. So this is his MO. He will never accept the result of an election that he doesn't win. So if that's the case, then thank goodness we have good lawyers. And thank goodness the majority of the judges, even Trump-appointed judges, held firm to the law last time. But this is quite a contrast to the old Republican Party, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, think about who they're having speak. I mean, they had that rapper woman that did slut talk the other night.
Amber Rose.
And then this guy's coming straight from prison, And
you couldn't make it up.
And they took the pro-life plank out of the platform. I mean, where is the moral majority? Where are the evangelicals that think that Donald Trump is somehow, sent from God? Are they not paying attention to the moral decline of their own party? It's fascinating.
Well, they think he's saved by God, I think now is the new role God plays.
Crazy.
What do you, Nick, think the sort of, you've now got the whole party that believes the lie about the last election. How does sort of the fervor and the agitation and the spoon feeding over 4 years, not just several months, change the calculations?
Become bedrock to the Republican base, and so much so that I've been here since the gaveling in of this convention. And most nights, we've heard these pretty tailored lines about non-citizens voting and how we need to pass a law to ban non-citizens from voting in elections, something that's illegal almost everywhere, and certainly at the federal level. But by saying that, it feeds into what's been kind of eroding trust in elections for the last 4 years. And it sounds like something that's so unbelievable that so many non-citizens could be voting, such as to turn a statewide or even a presidential election, would be an unfathomable accusation if it were made in 2019. But that it's made now and that it's accepted and cheered, it received standing ovations yesterday when it was made multiple times by multiple speakers, from Senator Rick Scott to Chairman Whatley the day before. And that just kind of shows how much this has shifted into a pillar of kind of what the base believes, whereas it was once just, kind of conspiracy theories.
It's so unbelievable. And I'm just thinking of all the tapes of Kevin McCarthy, acknowledging that he'd lost, and McConnell referring him for criminal prosecution, something that couldn't even happen anymore.
There'll probably be 2 more appointments to the court. There's probably 2 people going to retire. Just imagine if he has 2 more appointments on that, what that means forever.
It's the stuff of my nightmares. President Joe Biden addressing the massive stakes in a brand new interview. This week, we're learning about a seismic shift in response from him to the Supreme Court's years now of transgressions and bucking of important precedents vital to the functioning of a democracy. President Joe Biden's plans to endorse major court reform, including term limits, an enforceable ethics code for justices, and, as the Washington Post reports, possibly the elimination of broad immunity for American presidents. It comes after President Biden long resisted calls from his own party, many of whom have had their own legislative proposals in this area at the ready. Some have called for the impeachment of Justice Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito for, quote, unchecked corruption, or demanded a special counsel investigation into whether Justice Thomas's repeated failures to disclose lavish gifts violated federal law, including our next guest, Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. David Jolly's here as well. Senator, this story broke while we were on the air, and I wish that I'd sort of seen you reading the news. I waited for your reaction. Your thoughts to news that President Joe Biden's moving in this direction?
Very good news.
Yeah.
The court ethics bill is through the Senate Judiciary Committee, and to have the president's support for that is very important. And we have both term limit bills in the House and in the Senate. I'm the author of the lead Senate bill, and that's really important to restructure the court. It has become so politicized and it has become so grandiose that things that I think were unthinkable just a few years ago are now, I think, viewed as extremely necessary by most Americans. And first off, we need to get to the bottom of what's gone wrong. I mean, we got to finish the investigating.
Senator, one of the things that's different is how much the wind of American public support is behind all of these initiatives. Let me read you some polling from Fox News, of all places. 60% of respondents in a Fox News poll disapprove of the Supreme Court. Only 38% approve. 56% disapprove of the immunity decision. 78% of all respondents approve of 18-year term limits for justices. This sort of feels like, a synergy of public opinion, a Supreme Court that is all but begging for this. People like yourself who've led these efforts, and a president who's ready to make a big and important move.
Yeah, and I think even bigger than those numbers are the numbers of people who want to understand what has happened at the Supreme Court, who think that Congress should do a full and proper investigation. And so, although Republicans are obstructing the Senate investigation right now, if voters put the House in Democratic hands, guess what Republican senators can't do? They can't filibuster a House subpoena. And Mr. Barron and Mr. Navarro learned a little bit about House subpoenas recently. So a whole investigative avenue could open up after the election. And we also hope that the Attorney General will do his job and look into these very predicated allegations that we've referred to him.
Is the next step on the investigations for him to either open, to find probable cause and open an investigation, or appoint a special counsel? Is that what would happen next?
Yeah, there are two ways into this. One is that the Attorney General could appoint a special counsel and instruct the special counsel to look into the tax problems, potential tax fraud, the potential felony false statements, and the criminal misfilings under the disclosure laws, that whole package of issues. At the same time, the Judicial Conference is looking at making a referral to the Attorney General on whether Justice Thomas's misfilings under the Disclosure Act were willful. If there's a reasonable chance that they were willful, then that question of whether they were willful has to be referred by them to the Attorney General. So the Attorney General has two avenues, at least, into this.
It's extraordinary. Let me bring into our conversation Sherrilyn Ifill. She's the Endowed Chair in Civil Rights at Howard University. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Let me first ask you about the news that broke yesterday, about 24 hours ago, in the Washington Post, that President Joe Biden is preparing to announce support for Supreme Court reform. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that certainly President Biden has been on a journey, but I think many people, particularly many attorneys and those who practice in the Supreme Court, have been on a journey in becoming comfortable with the idea that some reform is absolutely necessary. And I think that many people will attribute Biden's transformation to political calculation, but I'm not sure that's true. I can tell you that there are a number of us in the field who practice, who are lawyers, who have tremendous respect for the institution of the Supreme Court, who have been shocked and appalled and deeply concerned about what we have seen the majority of this Supreme Court do, not only in terms of their ethical conduct, but in terms of the kinds of decision making and some of the kind of recklessness that we're seeing in the opinions that they're writing.
Yeah, I mean, Sherrilyn, I interviewed President Biden a year ago, and I saw exactly what you're describing, some of this institutional deference and reference. But I would argue that in addition to public opinion, we're talking about the polls. I mean, you've got 80% of Americans who would like to see term limits for Supreme Court justices. That the political climate is certainly favorable to reform and pretty scornful, frankly, of leaving the status quo in place, which includes a lot of Republicans, if you believe the way people are registered and self-identify. What's changed seems to me to be the Supreme Court and the cries coming from inside the House. I mean, you can read the alarm in the dissents of Justices Sotomayor and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Kagan. I mean, the radical nature of the opinions this term seems to be at least one of the variables.
Yeah, that's why I've often said, Nicole, that it's not just what the courts are deciding, but it's how they're deciding it, shortcuts that they're taking. It's the overreach, the lack of judicial restraint. All of that is part and parcel of what has concerned people. This is a court on a mission, and the mission seems to be to gather for itself as much power as it possibly can. And so we've seen this court undercutting the power of the executive branch through administrative agencies. We've seen this court cutting the power of Congress, creating their own standards for statutes that fall within Congress's purview. We've seen them unleashing the power of the president in this immunity decision. We have seen them returning us to a kind of states' rights republic, which I thought we had addressed with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. But they're doing this in the abortion realm. They're gathering this power to say not only what the law is, but how American life will be lived. And if a court is doing its job, you shouldn't be noticing it that much.
Yeah.
You notice your legislature, you notice your president. You shouldn't be noticing the courts that much in how you live your everyday life. But now 10-year-old girls have to notice the court if they have been victims of rape and are pregnant and have to now travel to another state to get an abortion. So something's gone off the rails, and there's a sense in which the court seems to believe it is untouchable. And yet Congress does have a great deal of power to manage and regulate much of the power of the court.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.